Welcome to Books on Point. Journalists Jonathan Ansah and Chris Whitfield take a magnifying glass to someone at the center of South Africa's most tumultuous period and try to understand the man behind the public image. The book, Joining the Dots, will examine why Pravin Gordhan has been dragged into major controversies like the Rogue Unit saga, the intelligence report, and other smears against him. For more, we are joined by both authors, Jonathan and Chris. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Jonathan, let's start off with you. What inspired you guys to follow in the advice of Minister Pravin Gordhan in telling us to join the dots, so to speak?
Well, I think the minister is such a mysterious figure, and we were quite intrigued by his life. He's been at the center, at the heart of a whole lot of watershed moments in South Africa's history, and we wanted to try and understand who he is, how he got to be at these points, and what motivates him. So in a sense, it's really to try and understand where the minister comes from. There's very little information about his background, about his role in the struggle, and his trajectory from university activist to a fighter against corruption, and to where he currently is.
All right, Chris, let's talk about that, because the minister isn't somebody who, talks about himself. If you ever do an interview with the minister, it's always work related. So how did he react to the idea that the two of you were going to write a book about him?
Well, we had to persuade him. It took us some time and several approaches, but eventually he came along and he gave us several interviews. And I must say, he was very, very frank. He answered every one of our questions. He didn't try and evade anything. So he was very open to the whole concept, I think.
All right, so let's go to you, Jonathan. What do we learn about the minister's upbringing that essentially shaped who he is right now, and in the way that he approaches some of the difficult decisions that I can imagine he faces on a daily basis?
Yeah, we learn a lot, and that's from, when he gets to university, this is when his political consciousness is starts to develop. And from that moment, he decides that he's going to dedicate his life to the struggle against apartheid. And what we learn is his single-minded approach to activism, how he develops this concept of mass mobilization, which is a fascinating part of South Africa's history, and how he decides that that this is what his life is going to be. And I think that's what we learn about that he takes into the post-apartheid era, is he lives a life of principle.
Chris, what does he make of the post-apartheid era? I mean, we've talked a lot on the show on various platforms on the SABC about the strides we've made, but there's also quite a lot that needs to be done and achieved as well.
Yes, I think, I obviously I'm not a spokesman for him, but I think if you asked him directly, I think he'd say that the country is moving forward and moving in the right direction. A lot of people ask why he stayed in the ANC when there was so much corruption and he stood up against it. And I think the answer there is that if he'd gone out, he would have lost his voice. And he felt that he was more effective staying in the party and fighting it from within.
Right, which is a nice segue into my next question for you, Jonathan. My intro talked about the controversies, the SARS rogue unit, and various other aspects. What sort of insight did he give you around how he dealt with those difficult periods? Because I guess from us reading it as journalists, you kind of get a snippet in terms of commentary on articles about, issues of that particular time.
Yeah, I think it was a very, very difficult time for him. And he spoke quite frankly about the impact that those smears had on him. But in all of that, he talked about how he was never prepared to deviate, and he could handle it. We did speak to other people who knew him at that time and asked them how he, what impact that all of this had on him, and they felt quite strongly that he suffered quite a lot physically, emotionally, that it was a real burden. And so he was quite frank with us about what it meant, but he was also quite determined not to deviate from his activism. He has a role to play, and he wasn't prepared to let those smears, be an obstacle.
Chris, the process of putting this book together, I mean, in the intro, you guys talk a lot about how you had to go through various people to eventually get the minister to give you time, and he did give you time, but the other people who commented, who gave you interviews, how long did that process take?
Well, we worked on it for just short of a year, and we interviewed a lot of people, as you would have seen. And they were very open. His friends and colleagues were generally of the view that his story needs to be told, and they were open to being interviewed by us. So we worked together, we researched together, and we did the interviews together, and then we kind of divvied up the chapters and decided who would do what.
All right. Jonathan, what do you hope, readers will get from this book in either understanding the minister or the various aspects that happened between his, time in KwaZulu-Natal right up until now?
I think just, his story hasn't really been told. There have been snippets about it, but his involvement in the struggle against apartheid is actually something that we don't really know about. It's not talked about in detail in the public domain. So I think what I hope readers get is actually a sense of the minister's contribution to South Africa and how he really has been quite instrumental in many of the important milestones in this country's history, and really, it's trying to get a sense of somebody's contribution is you don't get it immediately. You sometimes need to take a few steps backwards, and I hope that people can start to see the picture of his contribution that he's made in the apartheid era, and then again in the post-apartheid era.
Jonathan and Chris, thank you so much for your time. That is Jonathan Answer and Chris Whitfield talking to us about their latest book, Joining the Dots, an unauthorized biography of Pravin.